Welcome, everybody. Thanks again for being here today on a challenging day with a challenging topic. I'm excited to say I am coming at you live from the Hartwell Institute today in sort of the spirit of taking care of myself and this challenging topic. I thought it would be nice to be in a place with some other folks that care. Thank you already to our audience members who are here today for this challenging topic. I know that I have not been impacted by this topic at the level that people here have been, and the level of heartbreak that this topic makes me feel is really tough. And I appreciate that Jillian was given the talk down already before we even started about the importance of taking care of yourself. Kind of one of the things that we do often say at Trauma Training Tuesday, but bears repeating, is we're here for you. And so center yourself and your experience and your own comfort and safety, if that means being off camera, if that means muting yourself, if that means stepping away, it is all good. We want you to be able to receive the information however you can. And again, we are recording it in the knowledge that many people catch the recording so that they can get this information in the comfort and privacy of their own space at their own time. And that's what we think. We think that's another powerful aspect of it. So Jillian, welcome again. Jillian, you are now in the small group of people. I think you're the third person to do 3 Trauma Training Tuesdays for us.
I don't know if that's a highlight or
In my book, it's an amazing achievement. And the other 2 people in that club are Reverend Aaron Payson and rock star Nikki Bell. So it's a kind of awesome club to be in. And I think it's an awesome club to be in. So I appreciate you for being in that club. And if you haven't been to Jillian's other trainings before, her other area of expertise is on working with our new arrivals, our immigrants and refugees. And so that is why we're like, wow, this is not the easiest day for Jillian personally, being in space, being at a point in time where populations we really care about are very much under attack. And Jillian, that's why you are here for time 3. You are the queen of hard things. And I like to think of myself as being pretty good at dealing with darkness and hard things and difficult topics and being alongside of people. But my hat's off to you, girlfriend. You continue to show up for people in ways that I'm amazed, impressed, and inspired by. So thank you for that. And I know you're going to continue to do that. And that's so powerful. I'm going to be quiet now and kind of turn it on over to you to lead us through this really challenging topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, today is a heavy day. As Amy mentioned, I work primarily now in my role with refugees, immigrants, migrants. And so we hosted a meeting this morning where some of you were there to talk about the changes happening. And I didn't fully think through when I offered to do the date that I did, what today's date was, but it's okay. We can do hard things. And honestly, for me, with what I've been through, I'm now almost 10 years out from her loss. And I don't get opportunities to talk about my second daughter as much as I did closer to the loss. So in some ways, I enjoy these opportunities because these are times that I get to share her with people who don't know her. That's always a fun experience for me to get to share about what a beautiful and wonderful addition to my family she is. So I am going to share my screen. Oh, hang on. Let me unshare and then share again because I didn't share with the audio. I know how that goes. All right. So, I did this training many years ago at St. Vincent's Hospital for some of the nurses. And I had a different cover page, but it was called Love You Forever then. So I just kept with the same title. This picture, which might look familiar from the flyer, is my mom's hand on the bottom, and then my hand on top of my mom's hand, and then my daughter's foot. My mom was my rock through everything. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2020. And so losing the only other person who loved and cared for my child the way that I did was certainly challenging, especially as it happened March 23rd of 2020. So just a handful of days into everyone kind of separating. And the going through the first without that support really pushed me into sort of redefining what life after loss looks like. But one of the ways that I have sort of always honored her life is to share about my daughter. Some people cope with grief differently. Some turn inward and are uncomfortable sharing, but then there are other folks who the process of sharing is part of their grief journey. And for me, I definitely fall in that category where I have always been very open about our experience, our loss, what helped, what didn't. And so I'm really thankful for the opportunity to share this with all of you today. A little bit of framing is that the main topic of this discussion today is around infant loss. We're going to talk about statistics, which might look at things like stillbirth, termination for medical reasons, late-term pregnancy loss, SIDS. We won't talk as much about miscarriage, but that certainly is a equally traumatizing experience. And one thing that I always try to remind other people about as well as myself is that loss looks different for everyone, and the way that loss impacts us is different for everyone. So while one thing might feel more traumatizing to me than someone else, that same thing may be less traumatizing given whatever they've been through, whatever their supports are, what the experience itself looked like. So I also want folks to be mindful to take care of yourselves. There is a video during this where there's music and photos that will be playing. And then there's a few photos throughout, but they're all a little more general. But just be mindful, do what you need to do. As Amy said at the beginning, if you are on camera and you need to go off, if you need to step away, all of that is what is fine. It doesn't, make us good or bad people if we can or can't sit with this information. Prior to going through this, I really only knew of one person who had lost a baby, and it was sort of this like mystical thing that I didn't know anything about. I didn't know what to say. And so understanding that everyone is coming today to this training with a variety of experiences. Some of you may have experienced this yourselves. Please, please, please take care of yourselves if you've been through that. And then there are some folks who this is the first time they're really hearing about any of this. And so you might find yourself kind of being surprised by some of the information that is shared. I also am always happy to answer questions. There are no questions for me that are off limits. There are no questions that are too uncomfortable or inappropriate. I think that the more we can educate ourselves, the better. And that comes from asking the hard questions and the questions that we're scared to ask. Because chances are, if you're thinking the questions, so is someone else. And being able to answer those questions, you might be helping other people. So some basic statistics. There's a whole bunch of different things as to what causes miscarriage, what causes late-term losses, why people might have to terminate for medical reasons. There's neonatal loss, which is a loss in the first month of life, and then SIDS. Some of the things are preventable. Things like having malaria or syphilis could impact the health. Then there's anyone who has been a pregnant person that has gone to medical appointments knows there's a lot of focus on, don't eat certain things, do eat certain things, don't drink certain things, do drink certain things. It can be really challenging to always know, am I doing the right thing? Which can lead to a lot of guilt and stress on the pregnant person around, are the things I'm doing harming my child, especially because in the very early stages of pregnancy, there's really no way to know whether things are going well or not going well. And if you've never been through a loss, you don't know what to look for. But if you have been through a loss, which we'll talk about later, pregnancy after loss is its own potentially traumatizing experience as well, because you have those experiences, you know what to look for, or again, you're sort of kept in the situation of not knowing. But as many other things in our society, there tends to be a lot of blame put on pregnant folks. And often it is, if someone goes through things like an early miscarriage, it might be, well, did you eat something? Did you take a medication? Even when people don't mean it to come off as judgmental, it's sort of acceptable in our society, I think, by some folks to ask these questions. Stillbirths happen later in pregnancy, so anywhere after 28 weeks, it's considered a stillbirth if the baby passes either while in utero or during the birth. And more than 40% of stillbirths happen during labor, many of which are preventable. A very common cause of stillbirth is a cord around the neck or a placental abruption. Those are very common issues that can lead to it. And most of the stillbirths take place in low and lower middle income countries. However, in our country, there isn't necessarily a significant difference between socioeconomic status. It definitely impacts across the board, but Black women are more likely to experience a loss across the board than other categories of individuals. Even though we are a developed nation, we don't always have the best quality of healthcare when pregnant folks are trying to access it. Here in Massachusetts, we're very lucky that insurance will cover a pregnant person, even if they are undocumented. But there are other parts of our country where it is almost impossible to access healthcare when you're pregnant. And that can lead to a higher risk of a negative outcome for the individual. And these all come from the World Health Organization, which unfortunately after yesterday, our country is no longer part of, but we continue to look to them as a source of really important information about statistics worldwide. This is just helpful to know, but depending on the policy of the hospital, depending on when the loss happens, and as terms of how many weeks, determines what will happen. If you lose a baby prior to roughly 22 weeks, it's not even an option for you to take your baby with you from the hospital. The hospital makes the choice. That could have changed recently, but as of the last time that I was with anyone who had this experience in an earlier part, the option was if they're further on, they can be part of like a group cremation. And then there's a specific place in the city where they will scatter their ashes if you choose to do that. But obviously, when these are the words that we're using for someone who has just lost their baby, and we're referring to them in clinical terms, because the statistics around the numbers of folks that experience miscarriage, which technically speaking, miscarriage is the term that they use up until about 22 weeks, is that it was, a fetal demise. Those are the words that we use. And so we're not using the name of the baby or asking the family what words they want to use. And so this can really impact the way that women or folks who are pregnant experience trauma based around the words that are used to describe the experience that they're going through. And even in places like Massachusetts, where you would think that we've got, the best of the best, doctors need more sensitivity training, especially when we are going to them in the like 12 to 22 weeks of pregnancy, where we are, that is a baby, and we have been to doctor's appointments, and we are moving through a process where to us it's a baby, but to the medical providers, until it's reached viability, it's, just medical terms. So that can be really challenging. And we really need medical providers to do the work to educate themselves about the best way to care. And the best way to do that is to talk to the folks who have been through it, to hear from them what was helpful and what wasn't, which is something that I'll cover later on in this training. Also, just because of the work I do, I like to include a little bit of kind of cultural aspects that different cultural practices can also impact reproductive health and can increase risk of loss. So things like female genital mutilation can increase the risk of stillbirth or complications during birthing their baby. Teen mothers have higher risks of things like infections. They're also less likely to get prenatal care early on, just given a variety of factors that impact teenagers accessing care. So neonatal loss, this is the experience that I had. My daughter was born at 37 weeks and she lived for 5 days. So her loss is considered a neonatal loss. So that's the death that occurs within the first 28 days of life. In general, 1 in 4 pregnancies will end in loss, and that is all losses. That's early pregnancy, that's mid-pregnancy, that's stillbirth, 1 in 4 people that you know. So it looks like on this call we have almost 30 people. So if those 30 people were all birthing people, about 7 of us would have had some sort of loss. I'm not going to ask for people to share that information, but I think it's just helpful when we're looking at the numbers in the room that it's significant. It's not a small amount. And often folks, especially when you go through fertility treatments, have experienced more than 1 loss. I myself have had multiple miscarriages, all in the first trimester, as well as losing my daughter. So I've had the experience of working with many people and many different medical providers while going through losses. And across the board, folks need sensitivity training, and they need to better understand how to care for postpartum and grieving women and individuals. It was really hard to get good statistics around things like prevalence of PTSD. A lot of folks after losing a child are apprehensive to go to therapists or to get medical care for their mental health, in part because of the stigma and the shame and the guilt. But also one of the things just sort of anecdotally that I've noticed is that it's really hard to find a provider who can actually work with you. When I was trying to get in with a therapist, The first person they gave me, and I'm a social worker who did internships. The first person they tried to give me was, this happened in November. So I called in probably December, January, and they were trying to give me a social work intern in their first year. And I was like, absolutely not. Does the social work intern know how to help me? And so then the next best, I guess, was I ended up with this very well-meaning, but young gentleman um, who, again, had no idea, the poor thing. And so it wasn't really a helpful experience for me. I didn't get to find a therapist that knew what this was like, that could provide any kind of insight. And while as therapists, we usually, we want to maintain boundaries, we want to keep it professional, to know when I'm saying things that the person across from me just cannot even grasp what's being said, doesn't lead to a really great working therapeutic relationship. And so oftentimes when folks experience that, they tend not to go back, which was my experience as well. The same thing can happen in sort of group experiences for loss. Current, or at the time of my loss, the only group that was available was at UMass. So you had to keep going back to the place where your trauma was. And it was open to anyone who had had a loss. So there was no distinction. It was individuals who had had a 6-week loss with their partners, as well as folks who terminated for medical reason, as well as folks who had stillbirths, as well as folks who lost a baby up to 6 months. I don't know what that's like to lose a 6-month-old. I know what it's like to lose a 5-day-old. I know what it's like to have a miscarriage. To me, those were two very separate, distinct experiences. And being in with people and wanting to be able to express those things, but not wanting to hurt other people's feelings, left that space not being a safe space. And those were words we heard from a lot of people, because then we had folks who wanted to share openly about their miscarriage and the trauma, but then we're saying, well, you have it so much worse. And so how can I even sit here talking about my loss when I don't have it as bad as you do? And that's not healthy. So we need to make sure that spaces we create for folks to receive support also match their needs, which is just, that's just providing good care across all continuums, is that that should be reflective. The folks who are running the groups ideally should know what it's like to go through a loss. And that was not the case. And the person would repeatedly say that during the meetings. So again, just not, it was intended to be helpful, but it wasn't executed in a way, unfortunately, that was helpful. So again, a little bit of statistics. The most recent data I could find was from 2022, is that the neonatal mortality rate was at 3.5 deaths per 1,000 live births, which was an increase from 21. I didn't find any information about why that was, but it being during COVID, I would think that that had some impact on the data. And then preterm infants. So this is looking at any baby born before 37 weeks. So that includes a baby who's born at 22 or 23 weeks that is, breathing and able to go up to the NICU. That rate shifts to almost 35%, which again is because it includes those really, really, really preterm babies. If you were to look at the rate for, say, 32 to 36 weeks, it would be it would look closer to the live birth rate. But they typically don't separate out those categories in a lot of the research. I'm not really great at looking at the chat, so just want to make sure I didn't really.
You're not missing any questions or anything.
Right.
We're just all kind of using the chat to commiserate and support each
Fine,
other.
fine. If a question comes in, let me know.
Okay.
So some of the challenges we've talked a little bit, but I wanted to kind of tease them out a little bit to talk about. So one is just lack of information. Most pregnant people aren't prepared for the potential of loss. My first pregnancy, my daughter was born at 31 weeks due to preeclampsia. And so she spent about 6 weeks in the NICU. Not once was the discussion of her not surviving ever discussed. And my experience was, yes, she was born early. Yes, I had to leave the hospital without her because she was in the NICU, but then she came home and we went about our lives. So I didn't have, for me, it was, if we get to the point where I'm beyond the first trimester, we're good to go and I can handle whatever is thrown at me. I am a single mom by choice. I did go through fertility treatment to get pregnant. And so I chose this option to grow my family. And so that led also to some of the guilt and shame and trauma of, sort of this voice in the back of my head of like, you chose this. And so now this is, these are options when you choose things. So at 9 weeks pregnant, I went to my first doctor's appointment. They tried to do an external ultrasound. They couldn't hear a heartbeat. I'm a bigger human, which that happens. So they did an internal ultrasound. Her head looked a little funny on that ultrasound, but it was early, so everything seemed fine. We, her heart rate had been a little low, but nothing concerning. I declined the first trimester screening because to me, it didn't matter what her needs were. I was going to parent her. I wasn't going to make decisions about ending a pregnancy, so I didn't feel it necessary. And if anything were to come at her anatomy scan, then we would just address it then. I went back to the doctor at 12 weeks, and again, they opted to do an internal scan. And the woman doing the scan just sort of abruptly stopped doing the scan and left the room with the lights off, left me on the table. My mom was a nurse and she was like, uh-oh, I hope everything's okay. And I was like, everything's fine. She just like wanted to go tell the doctor, like she's excited, it's fine. Obviously having no idea. And then she came back, didn't really say anything, but was like, not making eye contact and you're going to go in the room and see the doctor. The doctor came in and said, that they noticed some fluid on her neck and that half of the babies who have that die and half of the babies who have that are fine. And so we don't know which category this baby falls into. And this was on a Friday. And we'll make a referral to UMass and you can follow up. I had my daughter's birthday party that weekend, her third birthday party. I remember nothing but sitting at her party crying because I had no idea what was going on with this baby. People were excited because I was pregnant, wanted to talk to me. I'm like, do I tell them that like I don't know what's going on with this baby? It was a lot, and there really wasn't any support offered. It was just, okay, go to this appointment and we'll see what happens. And I went to the high risk doctor at UMass that following Monday. And one of the first things that they ask you is, are you planning to terminate the pregnancy? It's like, I don't even know what's going on yet. Like, can we do step one first and find out what's going on and then let's talk about it? So they did the scan. They don't obviously tell you anything while they're scanning, but I'm having Googled all weekend. I'm trying to look at the scan and see what I can figure out. I can tell that she's got kind of bumps on her neck and fluid. So it turned out she had something called cystic hygroma, which is fluid on the neck, which is one of the things that they look for at the 12-week scan. But again, I opted out of that. And so they had me meet with a genetic counselor. And when I walked in, I said to her, take abortion off the table. Like, don't even talk about that as an option. It's not an option. Flag my chart, whatever you have to do. Like, I'm moving forward with the pregnancy, regardless of what you tell me now. I just need to know what's going on. And it was a lot of wait and see. Nobody knew. So I went back at 16 weeks. They said it didn't grow, but it also didn't shrink. So didn't know much. Went back at 19 weeks. And then that was for the anatomy scan where they found some additional issues. It was a male provider that was doing the scan. And I'll never forget his words. I think he was just talking because this is what people do. He was trying to get a good view of the baby, but again, I'm a bigger human. My babies sit back, and he couldn't really see. And so the words he used were, I'm throwing in the towel. I can't tell what's going on. And the same words of either it's nothing and the baby will be fine, or it's something serious and the baby won't survive. But we don't know. So again, this sort of stoic providers, this is what they deal with all day, every day. They're in a high-risk clinic where all day, every day, it's people with medical problems. No, my baby doesn't look the worst that you've seen, but to me, this is awful. And there was no compassion, no understanding. I remember sitting there crying, and it was sort of this like, we need the bed, like you need to move, because this is what they do all day long. And that is part of the broken healthcare system. They're paid by how many minutes you're sitting on that bed. Like, they're not paid for good quality care. There are some doctors who just do good quality care because that's what they do. But then there's other providers that, this is the job, they go to work. And again, it wasn't the worst that they had seen. So, but that led to a lot of that guilt and shame too, was, I'm taking up space. I want someone to care about how I'm responding to this. And they're sort of like, we're medical doctors. We're just here to tell you what's happening. We're not here to like console you. That's someone else's job. So we really need providers to, if that's not their job, then bring in a social worker with you when you're having these conversations, because someone has to be able to have those conversations, because otherwise you're just adding to the trauma. You're just adding to the challenging pregnancy, even if you're not intending to. Lack of care is a big challenge. I personally didn't experience that. I was very lucky to have providers who were generally speaking listening to me. And I would call and I would be concerned, and they would bring me right in. That was for both my daughter's pregnancy, as well as I ended up having another pregnancy, actually 2 pregnancies after I had a loss in between my boys. And they were all very, very supportive. But not everybody is given that kind of support. Not everybody has providers who listen to what is being said. And if you are not white, unfortunately, the risks of providers not listening to what is being said increase. So really that needs to be addressed. And then another really huge challenge that I don't think is given enough, acknowledgement is how inaccurate social media is. A lot of folks turn to these like baby groups, whether they're on Facebook. For me, with my first daughter, it was Baby Center. And the amount of inaccurate information that floats around those places is wild. Everybody's trying to one-up each other. Everybody's trying to, my pregnancy is so great, my baby's amazing. But no one is really addressing any of the, someone might say, I'm 36 weeks and I haven't felt my baby move. And it's like, oh, I'm sure your baby's fine. Go drink some juice, go lay down. Like, no, you shouldn't be taking medical advice from some random person on the internet. Our doctors need to tell us when we need to go in to get better care and follow up. And unfortunately, because there aren't a lot of perinatal supports, folks do turn to social media for those supports. As mentioned, sometimes people use harmful words even when they don't mean to. So after someone has a loss, people might say things like, well, at least you have your other children. The baby's in a better place now. You can have more children. None of that is helpful. The best things that people just said to me was like, I am so sorry and I'm here. I didn't want people to say, you're so strong. I didn't want people to say, like, how are you? Are you okay? I just wanted people to just like physically sit there. Because honestly, even when they were physically sitting there, I still felt so alone, regardless, that it didn't matter what words they were saying, as long as they weren't saying things that were hurtful. I've talked about this before too, but we don't listen to birthing people at all. We don't hear what they're saying. We don't address their experiences. We don't address the inequities in our healthcare systems. The care that someone gets at a community clinic looks vastly different to someone who's going to a birthing center. When they assess that you financially have certain means, you are given different understanding and treatment. When you're educated, when you speak English, you are given different treatment. It's not always on purpose. Sometimes it's just the way the system is set up. I had the opportunity to go with a new arrival mom to her ultrasound a couple weeks ago. I came to know of this family because she had a loss and was now no longer eligible for EA shelter. So Boston called me to say, we don't know what to do with her. She lost a baby. And so she's can't go into shelter because she doesn't have a child. So we were able to thankfully get her placed locally with a family. But she doesn't speak English. We went to this ultrasound. The woman is scanning. She's talking to her a little bit in English, which the girl's able to answer a little bit. Didn't bring in an interpreter iPad, didn't even have it available. Leaves the room to go have the doctor look at it, comes back in, says, okay, the doctor wants some other scans. This poor girl is looking at me like, is my baby okay? No one's saying anything. And then the woman leaves, comes back a few minutes later. This poor girl now is like a shambles. She was going to go to this appointment by herself. And the girl comes back and she's like, yeah, you're all set. You can go. No conversation. So I'm sitting there just calming her down. It's okay. Like, this happens. My daughter was a challenge too. They always had to do more scans. But if we're not there and we're not providing that support, who's doing that? Nobody. And so pregnant people are left in these rooms, in these situations where there's no information. And had there not been someone there to help translate what was going on, she would have just left having no idea what was going on. That's not quality care. And that's here locally. Like, that's a problem that needs to be addressed. So this is my daughter. I can't see the slides ahead, so like I can't always tell what's coming next. Her name is Amelia with an E. She is so cute. Like the cutest little nugget ever. I spent so long going on Etsy looking for this little pink hat for her. I don't know if there's another picture where it shows it better, but it has her name like stitched out in it. It's just the cutest. So I ended up having numerous other scans. Each scan found issues. And it turned out that she had something called Vactral association, which is a rare genetic condition. There wasn't a lot of information about it. Some kids are not really impacted at all. And then there are other kids who are significantly impacted. And when they don't survive, it's not specifically due to Vactral, it's due to one of the complications from Vactral. So when we were about 30 weeks pregnant, we went to Children's Hospital in Boston to do some more intensive testing to try to find out. And we saw everybody. They looked at her heart, they looked at her kidneys, I had an MRI done, they did everything and said, yes, she's got all these different issues, but everything that we're seeing, none of it looks life-threatening. Everything looks like, she's going to need surgery after birth. She's probably going to have some like long-term things that she's going to need help with, but she'll still, there should be no issues outside of that. And so like, that's fine. My mom's a nurse. I'm a social worker. I'm working early intervention. Like, we've got this, no problem. I reached out to our early intervention team, had them all set to like, here's our day that we're going to have the baby. It was supposed to be on Black Friday of 2015. So had them like ready, okay, like the next week you're coming to my house to do an intake with her. So I'm like, we've got this, like, we've got the supports, we know what we're doing. My oldest daughter then was 3. She was just a love bug and a joy, the easiest little nugget. So I wasn't concerned. I didn't go into this. And there was one scan where the doctor that I saw, Dr. Leftwich, anyone who knows her, she's amazing, said, if all you get with her are these ultrasounds, try to enjoy them, because I hated them. I hated the ultrasounds. Every single time something's wrong, I just cried through them. And I remember thinking, why is she saying, like, if all I get with her are these ultrasounds? Like, Boston just said she's not going to die. That's what I hear. No one's talking about the potential of death. No one's preparing me for this. No one's, and I don't know that I would have heard it, to be honest with you. So it's not that it was a lack on their part. I think it's just no one wants to think about the fact that their baby might die. But when there are definitely some factors there that are putting the risk up there, it would have been helpful to have not been completely blindsided, because I just had no idea that it was even on the possibilities, because Boston said she looked fine. So I think the next slide is a video. Yes. Can you hear the music?
There were photographs I wanted to take, things I wanted to show you, sing sweet lullabies, wipe your teary eyes. Who could love you like this? People say that I am brave, but I'm not. Truth is, I'm barely hanging on. But there's a greater story written long before me, because he loves you like this. I will carry you while your heart beats here, long beyond the empty cradle, through the coming years. I will carry you all my life. I will praise the one who's chosen me to carry you. Such a short time, such a long road, all this madness, but I know that the silence has brought me to his voice, and he says, I've shown her photographs of time beginning, walked her through the parted seas, angel lullabies, no more teary eyes. Who could love her like this? I will carry you while your heart beats here, long beyond the
I made this maybe in January after her loss. It was really hard to make, but a lot of people kept asking what happened, and I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to have to relive it every single time. But I would spend all night, every night awake, scrolling through pictures, scrolling through videos. And I, one night, just decided to put it all together, and shared it out. And so this has been shared quite a bit. It's on YouTube. And it's really grainy because it was made 10 years ago. But it's something that I've turned to even in recent times, when I've just needed to like see her face, to look at the pictures, because you know, after her loss, all the pictures were so close in my photos, and now that we're 10 years out, the pictures are still on my phone, but they're way up at the top. And so I can scroll through and I see, you know, my boys and my daughter, but to get to my, you know, to Amelia, I have to go pretty far back. So again, this is one of the reasons why being able to share her during times like this is helpful for me, because I don't get to talk about her as much. I still have some friends who are lost moms themselves, and we talk all the time. But even that is now less and less, because most of us gone on to have other living children, and the grief is just further out. And so it just shifts. So I know that that's a really heavy video. I appreciate folks who were able to kind of sit through it. It helped me a lot, and it helped. So my daughter in those pictures is 3.5. She was diagnosed with autism the spring following Amelia's loss. So she really had a hard time understanding what was going on. You know, we talked about a baby is coming, her room was set up with a crib, you know, lots and lots of like prep for this baby. And then a baby comes and she goes and meets the baby, but then there's no baby. And we had this doll that she carried around that she used to call her baby sister doll. Someone in the NICU gave it to her the day that we were saying goodbye. It was a huge doll, and that thing went everywhere with us for like 2 or 3 months. And she would sleep with it, she would cuddle with it. And once I made this video, my daughter would ask for this all the time. It was the baby sister song. And sometimes we would just listen to it on repeat, and she would cuddle me and we would cry together, and she's a very emotional little human. She's now 12 and a half. She heard this playing recently when I was prepping for something, or the boys had asked to watch it. And she was like, why are you listening to that? So it's still very raw for her. I have a teddy bear urn that my daughter's ashes are in, and the teddy bear now lives in my daughter's room because she is very attached. And some of that is because I only had the 2 girls at the time. And so everything that we did, the teddy bear went with us, and you'll see it in some of the pictures later. But this stand-in teddy bear sort of became part of our family. We went on trips to Disney. The teddy bear came with us. We did family pictures. There was the teddy bear. And that's pretty common with a lot of folks who've had later losses. There's something that you kind of attach to. For us, it's strawberries, because the outfit that she was dressed in on her last day was strawberries. For other people, it might be a fox or a bunny. And so anytime they see those things, they sort of, it's like, oh, seeing little moments of your baby. And so that teddy bear kind of helped us through the process. So some of the things that helped me after the loss were finding other folks that had been through the same thing. I turned to Instagram at the time, and there was a huge loss community there. And there were other people sharing pictures of their babies after loss, and we were able to do it. And the comments on those pictures would be, how beautiful your baby is, not why are you sharing that? It's so hard to look at that. I was really mindful after the loss of not showing certain pictures of my daughter because I tried to only on social media share the pictures of her alive. But then that became a guilt thing too, of there's people who didn't even get a minute with their babies. They wonder what their eye color is. And here I am with a baby who survived, even for a short time. So that's just part of our society, is this constant comparison to each other and this constant, like, someone else's loss is worse than mine, so I should be thankful for what I had, and not just loss is awful. And we can all acknowledge that regardless if your loss is similar to mine or not, it's still awful. One of the programs that's offered out in Worcester, Mass, they have loss doulas. So these are doulas who are trained specifically to support birthing folks through a stillbirth or through a birth of a baby that they know will not make it. It's through Empty Arms Bereavement. They're an amazing group. I've been connected to them since the jump. And I'm still connected to many of the folks from that group. There aren't similar groups out this way. They're tried to be, but none of them really got the same traction. But Empty Arms Bereavement is amazing with what they do. They do trainings, they have loss groups, they're all virtual still, so folks from out here can connect to those, and they're really well organized and well run. So if you have someone who's a birthing person who is looking for a loss group, they are great. And I also believe they have it in Spanish. They did have a woman who was running them who was a Black mom who had an infant loss, but I haven't seen her name on things lately, so I'm not sure. Another thing that was really helpful was my OBGYN saw me twice a week for the first 2 weeks after I left the NICU, and then saw me weekly for like another month after, mostly because she was so concerned about me, but also because she just wanted to like be available and check in and see how things were going. And she was able to get me on medication. She was able to address her concern because I went, we came home on a Sunday night. I went and saw her on a Thursday, and I was like, I want to be pregnant now. Like, I'm ready to like move on and like fill this ache and this gap. But then I also just want to sleep all day. And so can you refill, these anxiety meds and these sleeping meds? And I'm good. And she's like, I don't really want to do that. And there is a significant chance of substance use or misuse for folks after a loss, because again, you just don't want to feel it. I couldn't sleep at night at all. Sometimes I could sleep during the day, but definitely not at night. And so I was looking for sleep meds because I needed to sleep. My body wasn't, because I'm also coping from just having given birth to a baby. I had to have a C-section. It was a really hard C-section. Folks who are in the birthing world, I had to have a vacuum removal of the baby during a C-section. I had a male medical student like pulling up on the baby. My body was coming off the table because this baby did not want to come out of my belly. She was cozy in there. She knew what was coming. And so she was hanging in there. So it was a really physically difficult C-section. And then I had a hemorrhage after. And it was tough. It was a really tough experience to heal from. And I had a lot of mood changes, as do most folks after they give birth. I had to deal with the challenge of, I had really wanted to breastfeed this baby. I wasn't able to with my first. And now, with my first, I didn't create enough. And now here I am creating milk and there's no baby here. And so I had to go through this process of what do I do with this? There are some lost moms who will pump their milk to give to other babies because that's helpful to them. I did not want to do that. But I also like didn't really want to stop it. It was, you know, you're not in your mind after. And you don't know what you want. Things that you want in 1 minute, you don't the next. There was a blanket that you could see in some of those, it was like a butterfly blanket that she had been wrapped in, and she had been cremated with an additional one of the same item. And it was always on the back of my headboard. And at some point, somehow, my mom thought she heard me say that I wanted her to wash it. And so she washed this blanket. That was the last thing that touched her. And I was devastated. And my mom felt so awful. And I had to like not lose it on my mom, because I'm like, I know that she meant well, but also like, oh my God. And it was one of those like out of body things of, it's just a blanket. Like in the scheme of life, like it's okay. But there was no rational side of me in that moment that could acknowledge that. And so thank God that I was able to take 3 months off before I went back to work, because I was not fun to be around. My mom, you know, joked during my pregnancy with my daughter that like, we're never doing this again. Like, I'm never going to go through a pregnancy with you again. Obviously after, she's like, yeah, as soon as you want to have another baby, like I'm here for you. But it wasn't a lot of fun around there. And not everybody gets paid time off to physically heal, to grieve. I initially had planned to go back after 2 months, but then asked for that extra month because I just wasn't ready. I was working in early intervention at the time. I didn't want to go home visit with babies. That didn't sound like something I wanted to do. And I was realizing that some of my triggers were babies crying. If we would go anywhere and I would hear a crying baby, it was like automatic lose it. I couldn't deal with seeing baby girls. Baby boys weren't bad for whatever reason. And oddly enough, that's how I met a very, very good friend of mine. Was she referred her infant boy for early intervention, and I went out to do the intake. And she had been through losses, and you know, we were connecting. But if she had had a girl, I never would have met her, because there was no way I was going near anybody's houses that had little girls. And I felt bad. My sister-in-law ended up finding out she was pregnant. They told us on Christmas Day, the first Christmas after my daughter passed, that she was pregnant. So that was hard. And she had a little girl, and it was so hard. If she had had a boy, it would have been fine, but she had a girl, and it was so hard. And the guilt around that of like, I'm supposed to like be this auntie and be this loving person to this baby, and I want nothing to do with this because I don't have my baby. And feeling guilty even for that, because our society sort of sets it up of, you know, unfortunately, when we group things like miscarriage in with infant loss, we also group what we expect people in terms of coping to look like after that. And so there are many folks after a 6-week loss who are back to work very quickly. A lot of times, the way that systems are set up, you can get like the 3 bereavement days after giving birth, but they don't necessarily give you more time. Here in Massachusetts, we have state mandated, where you're guaranteed 6 weeks after a birth and 8 weeks after a C-section, but not every state has that. And so there are some folks who have to go back much sooner than they wanted to because they don't have another choice. I had a lot of physical effects after. I ended up having some issues with my heart after. Obviously, difficulty with sleeping was no surprise. I had super passive suicidal ideation, but it was there. I'd be driving and I'm like, I could just drive into a tree right now and that would be fine. And literally the only thing that saved me from that was that I had a living daughter that needed me. But these are just, you know, normal feelings that people have, but people don't want to talk about that because there's so much fear around. If I tell you that I'm thinking about driving my car into a tree, like you're going to want to do something about that. When the reality is I'm just so sad that I don't know what to do with myself, and not going here and not experiencing this feels a lot better, which is very similar to every other suicidal ideation. But unfortunately, a lot in our, there have been movies where the title is "Don't Talk About the Baby." We don't talk about infant loss. We don't talk about miscarriage. And, how many times do we hear things like, if someone has a miscarriage, like, oh, I've had one too. Like, it's very dismissive. That's a baby, that's an experience. And we don't provide support. One of the miscarriages that I had while I was working, because they don't give you time off for these things. And that's the way that our healthcare system is set up, is in our, employment options are, we're not going to give you a week off for this. If you birth a baby, that's a different experience. And again, when we're grouping a 6-week miscarriage with a 20-week loss, which they're calling a miscarriage, those are two very different things. But the system is seeing them as similar, and we're not providing support. And that's part of why long-term effects, we know that folks up to 5 years after, more than 50% are still having symptoms, whether they're physical symptoms, whether they're mental health symptoms. I went to a training shortly after that was done. I don't know if it was DPH or someone else. It was an early intervention training on loss in like parents losing children. And they were like, yeah, if after 2 years someone is like still sad, like they need to like go see someone. And I was like, what world are these people in, where you would think that there's a set time frame that after X number of months or years, you should now just be good. I mean, I'm almost 10 years out. I'm at the point where I can watch these videos without crying because I can compartmentalize. It's not that I'm not sad. It's not that I'm not devastated, but I'm able now. I've learned how to live with this loss. I haven't moved on from it. I haven't gotten over it. I've just learned how to live with it. And that takes a long time, and not everybody is in that same situation. There are some folks who will never talk about their child again because it's just too hard. Questions like, how many kids do you have, are really challenging. After her loss, I told everybody, and I was like, I don't care if that makes you uncomfortable. You shouldn't ask those questions. Now it depends on who asks me as to what I say. I also have a tattoo on my wrist of her name. And so sometimes I'll get questions about the tattoo, and I'm like, hey, if you're asking, I'm going to put it right out there. And it has made some folks uncomfortable. Yeah. So it'll be a little hard to see, but this is mine. So her name here, Amelia, is in her primary care nurse's handwriting. And then I Carry Your Heart is in my mom's handwriting. And then I've got the strawberry with 5 little seeds for the 5 days. And the person who did my tattoo turned away while I put some of her ashes in the ink. And so her ashes are in the ink of my tattoo, which is something that sort of is available, but it's not really well known. And a lot of times, artists will do like that. Like they'll kind of turn, whatever happens when I'm not looking. But that was why I had her cremated. I wanted her with me. I didn't want to bury her somewhere where I might move or not be able to reach her. I wanted her with me all the time. Loss community is so important. I mentioned Instagram. That's where I met most of these other folks in the picture. All 4 of these women had stillbirths during labor. And the one that's holding the little, it's a badger. I was actually contacted by a friend because she was at St. Vincent's and found out she was having a stillbirth at St. Vincent's. And so her friend reached out to me. I was about a year out from my loss and said, hey, I don't know what to do. Can you help? And so she and I got connected pretty quickly. And while I was preparing my pictures for this, I came across some of the pictures that I have of like us visiting her son's gravestone, and some pictures I had of him. And so I was texting him to her, and I'm like, oh, I miss him. But these were the people that like helped me survive this. I'm still friends with these folks to this day. We had a couple get-togethers. This picture is from one get-together, but then the picture over here is from a different get-together. As you can see in this one, the bear is in a strawberry outfit. In this one, she's in a different outfit. We used to change her clothes. We used to change her bows. It was like a whole thing. And these folks do the same. So this one, the little girl's name was Maeve, and they did foxes. And this bench it says, "We love you always, Maeve Lucille, born sleeping." This was a kangaroo and a bunny for Isaac. The kangaroo, the little girl's name was Sarah. And this was another mom who also had a little girl named Maeve, who passed. These three are all from Maine. And then this mom lives in Massachusetts. So we sort of had this like New England lost group that we would get together sometimes. And we went to like a butterfly garden, and we just had like text threads where we could message each other. And it was really helpful. And I met them all like in the first few months of my loss. So we all went through like the first birthday together and kindergarten starting together, and all these milestones that, you know, you don't just lose your baby in that moment, you lose all the other pieces. So, you know, my daughter, when she should have been starting kindergarten, was actually really super emotional for me. And I didn't expect it to be. It kind of came out of left field at me how emotional I was for it, in part because it was after my mom had passed. And so I was going through this like big milestone kind of by myself. And I continue to be surprised by the things that strike me. But having other people who know what it's like is very, very helpful in terms of moving through the grief process. So some other things that helped, again, the support of medical providers, having medical supports like the antidepressants, anti-anxiety, having those frequent check-ins and access to quality medical care, having that supportive friends. They started a meal train for me afterward, because trust me, if they hadn't, we wouldn't have eaten for weeks, because that was not on the list of things to care about, was whether we were eating. So the only time we ate was when the food showed up at the door. They also started a GoFundMe that helped significantly with being able to pay my bills while I was on leave. That allowed me to extend my leave by a month because there was financial help. We had some folks who, you know, came over and just kind of like held space with us. That I didn't like as much because I just like, if I wanted to go in my room, I didn't want to feel like, oh my God, I'm leaving you. And, you know, of course, my friends were like, we don't care. We're just like here for you. But it was that guilt of like, I should be hosting you 2 weeks after a loss. But the friends who were like, I don't care, I just like physically want to be here in case you need me, were so helpful. And like I've already said, kind of that ample time off. And then I actually had really supportive colleagues when I went back to work. They asked ahead of time, are there things you want us to tell the team? Are there things you don't want us to tell the team? And I said, tell them not to ask me how I am. When I walk in, they can just be like, hey, Jill, like, don't say, and it's, I mean, that's part of American culture. We all in passing, hey, how you doing? Like, that's what we ask. But that was just such a huge trigger for me. I didn't want to hear that. And so people were really supportive of that. Things that hurt. Biggest thing was having to wait in the waiting room with pregnant people when I would go see my provider. Being roomed in and the person rooming me not knowing that I had a loss. And so saying like, oh, you didn't bring the baby with you? Yeah, no, I didn't bring the baby with me. Or like, how old is your baby now? The one who's dead, like not here. And unfortunately, I turned a very dark humor in my way of coping with things, which can make many people uncomfortable. But if you're going to not be aware of what's going on and you're going to ask certain questions, you're going to get the response. And I asked for my chart to be flagged after the first time it happened, and it still happened again. And it was a lot of, which you know, you've got folks moving at the speed of light, right? It's all about how many humans you can pack in a day in terms of how much money is made and all that. So we've got a system that is not set up. There needs to be like, you know, they're the first people of the day that are seen, or the last people of the day, or you get put in a certain room, or there's something you put on the room to acknowledge these things. Like There has to be an option. My doctor did say the first time I went, she was like, why didn't you just tell them at the desk? I told them to room you right away, not to make you wait. And I was like, I don't know. Why would I think I have to tell you? Like, I don't want to wait out here. So that was challenging. I had some people who tried to compare it to things that just are apples and oranges. Many people who compared it to the loss of their pets, which, yes, I understand, your pets are your babies. I have pets. I love my pets. It is not the same. And that tells me that you haven't been through this loss, because if you had, you would know that it's different. But now that I'm further out, I can understand you were just trying to connect. You were seeing that you've been through it. It was really hard. You're just trying to like acknowledge. But in the moment, it just feels like minimizing. Like, oh, so like me losing a baby is the same as like your dog. But for them, maybe, you know, some people's dogs are super important to them, and I appreciate that. But I shouldn't be in a grief group with the people who are grieving their pet loss, because it's just so different. I lost a lot of friends after. It was kind of interesting looking back at those the videos and in the pictures, seeing people in the background, because I'm like, yep, they stopped talking to me. They stopped talking to me. I don't know if it was that it was hard to talk about things. But for me at the time, it felt so overwhelming because I had so few people who had met my daughter that I could talk about her with people who knew her, that every time I lost one of those people, I lost another piece of my daughter. And it was so painful. That was one of the hardest parts of losing my mom, was I lost, like, I used to be able to say, you know, what was this like? What did she do here? And my mom would be like, oh, this is what happened. And I swear, even if she didn't know, she just made it up and I wouldn't have known the difference. But I lost that. I lost the people who knew her in that same way. You know, it's similar to when your kid has like a major medical issue and you relive that with the partner. Like, oh, remember when we, you know, she broke her leg? Like, it's a thing. I didn't have anybody to talk to about that anymore. The one friend, there's one picture where I'm holding her and there's a friend in a red sweater. That friend has been there for me like nobody's business since that happened. She was one of my staff, which makes it a little bit funny. They asked to come see me there and I didn't respond to them because I'm like, that's kind of weird that my staff wants to come see me. But they showed up anyway because these are the kind of friends that they are. And so she's one of the only people that's like in a picture with my daughter. And to this day, she's just so supportive. She remembers all her birthdays. She remembers, you know, she'll see things that are strawberries and she'll send them to me like, oh, I was thinking of her today. And that's just, it just makes the difference. I had another friend who every single day for the first year after her loss would just send me the heart emoji. She didn't know what to say, had no idea how to be helpful, but every single day, somewhere throughout the day, she would just send a little heart emoji. Most of the time I didn't respond, but then after the year she stopped and I was like, oh, I miss her text. Like, I miss the little hearts. Nothing was attached. It was just thinking of you. So it can be that simple. If you know someone going through this, it can be as simple as just a heart emoji, because no one knows what to say. And there's nothing you're going to say that's going to make it better. There's nothing you're going to say that's going to stop the fact that I just lost a baby. There's nothing you're going to say that could really make it worse, except for saying some of the, you know, kind of heartless things. But folks saying, I don't know what to say, I'm just so sorry, like, that's fine. I don't know what to say either. But the folks who could just kind of sit with me, that's really where the help was. There was a real loss of safe spaces for me. There were places that I used to love to go to, that like Target, that now I couldn't go to, because even if I tried to avoid the baby section, it's like, but I go to Target to go baby shopping and now I can't do that. Certain, you know, I'm watching Grey's Anatomy and all of a sudden here comes an infant loss that I had no idea was coming. So now this safe show that I used to love to watch, I can't even watch this show. Music was a huge trigger that I didn't even like expect. I don't know. I used to take weird pictures of myself, but the first day driving back to work, I'm driving along and this John Legend song, All of You, comes on, and it hit me, and I had to pull over to the side of the road because I couldn't breathe. I was sobbing because I used to play that song, lay the phone on my stomach while I was pregnant with her, and just somehow didn't even think about it until here I was driving along, and this thing literally hit me like a ton of bricks. And it's like you just don't know where some of these things are going to come from. It doesn't always make sense, the things that trigger you. And so you can create spaces that you think are going to be avoidant of these situations. My daughter was in gymnastics, and we used to, every Saturday we go there, and there at the time there were no babies. All of a sudden I'm noticing these babies, and these people are bringing these babies, and I would have to leave because I couldn't look at these babies. So all these places that were things I enjoyed doing, things I liked, I now couldn't do because of these triggers. And I didn't want the people with the babies to like not go there. I just wanted to not be triggered by it. So it wasn't that I needed people to like change what they were doing or change the environment. It was just hard for me. And I just sometimes needed people to like sort of be aware that it was hard. So pregnancy after loss sometimes is its own trauma. This is my daughter, Macy, who's literally the cutest little thing. And this was the cute little shirt that we got with some pictures I took when I was 8 weeks pregnant with a baby after Amelia passed. Unfortunately, at 9 weeks, the baby had no heartbeat. And so I had to have an assisted miscarriage with that baby. My daughter didn't understand, she didn't understand the pregnant, nor did she understand the not pregnant. But that was really, really traumatizing to me because it felt like I was losing my daughter all over again. It felt like I'm never going to be able to have a baby. All I want is my daughter to have a living sibling. She has to live a sibling through this teddy bear, and it's ridiculous. And then a couple of years later, due to fertility, my goodness, I ended up with twins. Not the goal. Didn't intend it. Sure did the whole ultrasound keep saying, I'm going to throw up. My mom kept saying, yay, one for you and one for me. And I was like, okay, we'll see how that goes. My daughter was thrilled. She was so excited. Not excited they were boys, but so excited that there were babies coming. My friend that I mentioned before that I met with the little boy did a little photo shoot for me. And the pregnancy was hard. I was high risk. It turned out after I had this loss, I got tested and I have a blood clotting disorder, which is likely part of why I've had so many miscarriages. Before the twins, I had another miscarriage, but it was like a chemical pregnancy. It was very early. But with them, I started on Lovenox right away and was able to generally have a healthy pregnancy. I had hypertension toward the end. And after they were born, I ended up with postpartum preeclampsia and ended up readmitted to the hospital. So pregnancies are hard for my body. My body doesn't enjoy being pregnant. Unfortunately, my twins had to go to the NICU, which was super, super, super traumatizing. They, at one point, were going to be in the same bed space that Amelia had been in. Initially, only baby A, who's Emmett, was supposed to be going upstairs. He was going to be in bed space 509. But then Jude decided to be a typical Jude and acted up. And so they both had to go up. So they moved them to the other pod where their beds would be side by side. I was so mad at him for acting up and going upstairs. But then once I realized that he would have been in the same bed space and now wasn't, I was like, okay, this may be the universe, like giving me a little bit of something. But it was a lot. It was a lot. These boys are wild. So they are now 6. I don't know how I've survived. But and again, this bear is part of everything, right? Like there's all these little pictures with the bear. We went to Tennessee for my daughter Amelia's first birthday. There's a restaurant down there called Amelia. It's an Italian restaurant. It's delicious. So we went down there to celebrate her birthday. We went up to the mountains. Actually, I'm sorry, it was for her second birthday. I don't know why I'm saying her first birthday. Her first birthday was on Thanksgiving, and that was horrible. Her second birthday, we went to Tennessee, and we went to the mountains because it felt like that was as close as I could get to her. I'm not a religious person, but I do believe that she is somewhere in the universe that I will hopefully see again. And so we went and got these cute pictures taken. This is just outside the restaurant in Knoxville. Sorry, how cute is my kid though? Like, she's literally just the little cutest face. And there's a singer, Amy Lynn, who has a song about loss. And I messaged with her, and she actually ended up meeting us at the restaurant and brought me some like goodies, like her CD. And I don't know who did it, but the restaurant comped our whole meal. And it was like literally the sweetest thing. Like, they knew we were coming. They had this like special place for us. They gave us all sorts of like little souvenirs that had the name of the restaurant on it. We went again the next year as well. It was kind of going to be our thing. And it just didn't, I don't know. The first year it was so like meaningful and great. And the second year I was like, we don't need to do this again. Like, it just shifted. I don't know. But the food was great. And then I was pregnant with the boys. So like, we weren't going anywhere. But this was them in the NICU, and we had pictures of both of the girls in their little isolette with them. Emmett was very naughty and had to be there for 11 days. Jude was only semi-naughty, so he had to be there for 8 days. But I still got discharged without them, and that was horrible. I got discharged on New Year's Eve, and we didn't leave until as late as possible. It was during flu season, so they wouldn't let my daughter come in. That was horrible, not being able to even see her. And then I discharged home, and on New Year's Day, I was having trouble like walking and breathing. And I was like, this feels like when I was pregnant with Macy. Sure enough, I had fluid in my lungs again and had pulmonary edema. So at that point I said, okay, we're done. We've got our twins, and like, never again. But then they admitted me to the hospital, and the next day Jude came home and I went home with him. And then a couple days later, Emmett was able to come home. I had the first 5 days with them. I did not trust that they were going to live past 5 days. For some reason in my head, it was here that like, this is a thing and I have to get through it. Then it was getting through the first 6 months were horrible, because at 6 months, the risk of SIDS goes down significantly. So it wasn't until probably after their first birthday that I finally was like, okay, I guess like they're gonna live. Because there was now no safe place in a pregnancy. So prior to my daughter, my first daughter was actually a twin pregnancy, and I lost her twin very early on in the first trimester. And so getting to beyond that point, I'm like, okay, this is fine. Like, now there's a safe place. Now we're 20 weeks. Now we're 24 weeks. Like, this is good. So then when my daughter passed, after, you know, she was born 37 weeks, it was full term. She lived 5 days. I assumed everything would be fine, and then it wasn't. So now it felt like with my twins, there was no safe marker. There was no place where I could say, okay, now we're at 24 weeks, or now we're at 37 weeks. I only got to 36 with them because they were huge. They were 6'11" and 5'12". So they had to come out at 36 weeks. But there was no like acknowledgement in my head of, okay, this is going to be okay, or okay, I'm going to get through this. And every time they slept a little longer than they should have, or looked a little funny, or didn't make as much noise, it was scary. Every time that my older daughter got sick, I was in a complete panic, thinking she was going to die from a very basic illness, a small fever, vomiting. My mind would automatically go to loss, because once you've lost one child, it becomes the reality that you can lose children, and so much more scary anytime anything happens, that something could happen, because the reality is this does happen. Babies die, children die. And if it happened once, it could happen again. So there really hadn't been any safe place. That has since sort of dissipated, in part because the boys are feral and have done some wild, wild things that they have managed through. So they're pretty sturdy, and I feel pretty good about their health. But just like, look at his little smile over here. Like, I can't. They were like so tiny over here, and now they're just intense. They're just so much. But there are still times that, you know, right now, one of them is very obsessed with my physical body, and that I, you know, carried the babies, and lots of questions about carrying babies. And my mom's ashes are in a box where the picture is the one that was in the video of her holding the baby. And so lots of questions about, because they don't really remember my mom. They were only 15 months when she passed. So lots of questions about who are these people, and, you know, my daughter will talk very freely about Amelia, and they're like, who is that? We don't understand. My daughter will still cry about it sometimes, and they're very confused about that. So trying to parent through that has also been its own challenge and its own trauma of, how do I talk about this with my kids, especially the boys? How do I talk about their sister in a way that isn't scary to them, that is just natural? And so we've got pictures of her up everywhere. We've got this bear that goes everywhere, and it's just kind of part of our life. And it's sort of all that they've known. They don't understand it in any real way, shape, or form. I think as they get older, they will. But it's, you know, they know that their names have meaning. So Emmett was named Emmett because I wanted an E name. And Amelia's nickname was Emmy. So for a very long time, Emmett's nickname was also Emmy. I still call him that sometimes. And then Jude's, they all have 3 middle names because I'm one of those people, but his second middle name is Dean, which is a French word for hope, which Amelia's second middle name is Hope. So, you know, he has some of her in him. And so they know that they're named after their sister, but again, they don't really know what that means, aside from that they have the sister. So that's the end. Another just super cute picture of all these little chunk of nuggets, where we just love to do little pictures of them. My daughter always, if we were taking a picture, it was, let me go get Emmy Bear. Emmy Bear has to be in it. Poor Emmy Bear has been through it. She's had to have her nose resewn. She's lost eyeballs. I've had to like reach out to the manufacturer to have them resend me the eyeballs. So she's, you know, hanging in there now that she just kind of sits on a bed. But my daughter took her everywhere, slept with her every night. So she really kind of lived through it. But her ashes are inside the belly. They go everywhere. I thought it was going to be a challenge when we were flying, but it wasn't. No one, you know, cared at all. People don't ask too much about it before they kind of used to. Like, I remember one guy being like, oh, you like stuffed animals? Like random, passing them in random. But other folks who've been through loss, when they see like a teddy bear like this, they automatically know. And so anytime now that I see people's pictures where there's like, you know, a little something that makes it into all these pictures, even without knowing that they've had a loss, it's sort of like this breadcrumb that you're like, oh, okay, I know what that is. But I think it also helps other folks to see that like it's okay to still incorporate your child. You know, 50, 60 years ago, people didn't talk about this. My mom had 2 miscarriages. I had no idea until after I had my daughter, and we started talking about pregnancy, because you didn't talk about those things. But now it's something that folks talk about, and, you know, that helps to reduce the guilt, reduce the shame, reduce the impact of the trauma when there's other people who you can talk to about it, and you're not treated like, why would you be talking about this, when it's, you know, something that should be private or something that you should sort of keep to yourself. So I will stop sharing it. There was so much in the chat, and I'm sorry, I try to like read chats when I'm on these things, but I just couldn't. So But if
Yeah,
people have
Jillian,
questions,
it wasn't anything you needed to respond to as much as just definitely there are people in this audience who have been through significant losses related to this topic. And it really is striking me how important and powerful it is that you are here today, willing to talk about this and willing to, kind of share your whole heart. It does make it really does help with the stigma that comes from loss, the isolation, all the feels that you're just amazing. Thank you so much. Um, and I know you said everything is open for conversation. So if people have questions or comments, I know lots of people did share that they have been through this kind of a loss, and just thank you so much for bringing it to the table for us to talk about. Anyone who wants to can just unmute and jump right in. If you want to share your adoration and admiration for Jillian or whatever is coming up, please share.
I'll share. I'll just say thank you so much for this presentation. I lost a nephew many years ago, and I wish that my sister and all of us had had access to even someone saying half of what you've said, Jillian, just validating. I just remember this sense of, you're not over that yet. I felt that all the time. And I know my sister felt that all the time. And so what a beautiful gift you're giving people by sharing this, what I can only imagine is still a very raw experience. Thank you, Jillian.
yeah, of course. And reading through, hearing that there were so many other folks who've had similar experiences or know folks, just like we said at the beginning, that out of, the 30 folks, there's likely at least 7 that have been through this. I knew that there would be folks in the room. Even if you came here, you didn't know what we were talking about today. There's going to be folks in the room, and there's always folks in the room. And in certain rooms, there's more folks because of the different disparities. But it touches everyone. And, I've known folks that have had losses like decades ago, many, many, many decades ago. And it's still raw, and especially more raw, more traumatizing because they weren't given a space where they could talk about it, or they were treated poorly. Reading in here of folks that have miscarriages and went and were given really poor medical care. I was at a fertility clinic when I had my first miscarriage, and they were like, we need the room. Like, you got to get out. And I'm like, you're a fertility center. I know you deal with this. How are you not better trained to support folks through this? Or, folks that are in OBGYN offices, like, they won't even let you come in for a first visit until you're like 10 weeks because so many folks are going to have an early loss. But then we're missing out on all these people who need the support. And we're basically saying, this is something that you have to deal with on your own. We don't even give you resources. We're just not going to see you until it's like less of a chance. That's not quality healthcare. That's just ignoring a problem. And I know that the systems are overworked, but at least to say, if someone calls in for an appointment, to say, we'll make the appointment. And then if they're not needing to come, like, follow up with something. No one even called me after my daughter passed. Like, the NICU, nobody called. I didn't hear from them until, her autopsy report was ready. Like, no one checked in. No one, can we do anything? It was just, okay, this happened. We made your little memories and your little, bracelets. And now here you go, with no resources aside from come back to the hospital that's so traumatizing and meet with a bunch of people if you want to. But it wasn't, unlike having something like a loss doula who's like there with you and someone you can connect with after. I work with an agency where I'm a peer mentor, so that after folks lose babies and they reach out and say, I need someone to talk to, we're available to them. So they can text with us, they could call us, they can email, whatever they're comfortable with, just to know they're not alone. Because that's really what helps to reduce the stigma, reduce the impact of the trauma, is to know you're not alone and to know that there's other people who are going to be there to support you and know exactly what you're going through.
I'm grateful to say we have some providers in the audience, because that to me just feels like such a place to build from. Like, as you said, and as many people said in the chat, the empathy was not flowing in abundance throughout this process for most women. And it could be so powerful if people had been more empathetic to many of us, right? Like, it just adds to the trauma when they're telling you to get out, move out of the room, or no understanding of sort of what's going on for you. And just that as a place that we could impact feels really important and powerful. And I just really appreciate your willingness to talk about the places where providers really could have offered support and missed it.
Yeah, one thing I used to do after her loss that helped me is I used to make these bags, and they were called Amelia's Bags of Hope. I'm throwing the website in that I still, for whatever reason, I pay for the website to be up there, but I don't make the bags anymore. But they were just these little bags, and if you go to the about the bags, you could see a picture. It had some forget-me-not seeds, it had tissues, it had a little candle to lighten their memory, but most importantly, it had a list of resources, both local and otherwise, where folks could find, because after my daughter's loss, they didn't give me any information. So I was all night Googling and trying to find websites, and there was no like one place to go to get it all. So I tried to create that where there was like the central resource. And then I started making bags for fathers that had more specific father-based resources. I made family bags so they could give them to siblings. I did that for almost 2 years, I would say. And then I don't even know why, but I stopped. I think it was after I got pregnant with the boys, I stopped. Financially, it was a lot to do, but it just felt really important. And so I provided them to the maternal fetal medicine clinic that they could give out when someone was having a loss. And Dr. Leftwich would send me a text and say, like, just gave out one of your bags. And it was just one of the ways of like, okay, she's like still here and part of this. But that's something that providers can do, even if it's not that you can give them this like bag. Even, I mean, the seeds packets cost like 25 cents at Walmart. Like, literally have some, cards that are ready with a little seed packet, a little, we're so sorry for your loss, and like a list of some online resources, which the ones that are on my website are still relevant for the most part. So you could still use those. Or even like link them to, this website, because they're still pretty relevant. But that's the biggest challenge after the loss, is just that having no one to turn to that understands, and there being so much shame around asking for what you need and for the resources. And I know Jane has her hand up, so I will let her talk now. Oh, and then she put her hand up.
Jane, if you had a question or a comment, please feel free to jump in. Absolutely, anyone jump in.
We can't hear.
Trying to unmute. Thank you so much, Jillian, for the talk. I was like, ooh, that is a lot. And thank you for being vulnerable and for helping so many, being a voice to so many people who have gone through loss. Many years ago, I used to work at the OBGYN, actually with the maternal fetal medicine. And You know, when you go to school and you learn about statistics and you learn about all these big words. And so, as a case manager, any woman who came and they had a loss, and especially the 3 first months, I would be like, oh, it's so common because statistically it's very, very common. And I will be like, oh, it's so common for the for the first 3 months to lose a baby. And until my second born, I almost lost him. And when I was 24 weeks, I think 23 weeks, uh, ultrasound, they found out that my son had what we call atrioventricular receptor defect. So his heart was not formed. And those that are familiar with the heart, there is the four chambers, and there is the bicuspid valves and the mitral valves. They never formed. And so there was a possibility that I would actually not even give birth. He would die in utero. And the way the message was relayed to me, it was so bad. I remember I went and did the ultrasound. Then I came back to the office, and the nurse called me, and the nurse was like, "Oh, you need to come back to the clinic. Your baby has a very bad heart." That's the way it was relayed. And I remember losing it, and my workmate in the office calling my husband, and she was like, "You need to come and pick your wife. Like, it's bad." And I happened to go home, then went back to the clinic, and from there I was transferred from St. Vincent to UMass to the maternal fetal medicine. And from there, I would still be transferred to Brigham's and Women, because now my son has to be followed at the Children's Hospital. And the night I was transferred there, I remember at the reception, because I checked in like 7 p.m. at night, the reception asking me, "Have you completed your GED?" So it kind of like throughout the system, it was so horrible. And when I did the genetic counseling, one of the doctors came to me and she's like, "You know, you can terminate your child, and we are giving you only 1 week to think about it, because after the I think 24th or the 25th week, it's illegal in Massachusetts." And I was only given 1 week to think about it. And I remember Jillian said something that really struck with me. I was like, I'm ready to have whatever God gives me. That's not gonna be my choice. And she's like, "Oh no, we're gonna be there to support you." And I'm like, "I don't want your support in that area." And finally, my son was born, and thankfully, today he's 15 years old. But that changed my life forever. When I went back to work, I was there for every woman who was pregnant. When people had losses, I knew what to say. I never said, "Oh, it's very common." And though I was mostly seeing Africans, our way of mourning, our way of going through losses was very, very different. And I saw women getting confused with, "What are you talking about, that you're gonna take my child and bury her or him with another 100 babies and scatter their ashes in one of the cemeteries in Worcester?" They were getting confused with all this information. And the fact that you go home without holding a baby, that was very, very hard for most of the, and I believe for every mother, because even when I had a baby, I had to leave my baby at NICU for 2 weeks and then keep visiting him like twice a day. That was, you talk about postpartum depression and the stress that's come around it. It is so hard. And the fact that many of the patients that I was also working with, they did not have families here. So it is very, very tough. And sometimes they did not even have someone to leave their other siblings, the babies with. And so when you talk about the losses and the trauma informed care, that was not there at that time. And I just want also to take this opportunity to thank Amy for the trauma training, because it has revolutionized, it has done such a great work, even for us who are in healthcare and social services, just coming here and get trained and finding that language to talk to individuals who are going through losses or even difficult times or even traumatic events in their life. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate. And thank you, Jillian, again.
Thanks, Jane. Go ahead, Bill.
Jillian, thank you very much for this presentation. I quite frankly didn't know how much this was going to affect me. I've never been remotely close to a loss of a child like this. And I have no words. I just want to say thank you for being so strong. I'm very sorry for your loss. And I'm very proud of you and thankful that you're able to help other families that are in a similar situation. So keep doing what you're doing, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. That means a lot. No, Daphne was trying to talk, but it wasn't coming off mute. I don't know if she wanted to try again. Just couldn't hear her. I think there's something up with the way your audio is connected, Daphne. No, we can't hear you. Sorry. If you want to put it in the chat, though. No, that's hard. Or call me after. The number of new arrivals that I've met that have had losses is substantial. One of the women that I became very close to had lost a baby in Afghanistan. And, you know, I think we can all imagine, without even knowing too much, what healthcare in Afghanistan looks like, never mind healthcare for folks who are experiencing loss. And these are folks who went through the worst things with no support, with no healthcare, with, you know, the way that the system is set up there, like socially, you know, they don't talk about it. But she said, like, everybody loses babies there. That's just like what happens. And it doesn't make it easier. And once I found out, you know, everyone, was trying to see if there was someone on this call that knew her, but everyone that knew this mom was like, she's so difficult. Like, she's so hard to connect with. She's so angry. She had another baby who was terminally ill. It was very sick, in and out of the hospital. And no one even knew that she had had this loss, right? So she shares with me about the loss. I show her my tattoo, which of course in Muslim culture, like, you don't get tattoos, but I showed her the tattoo. And as soon as she knew that, like, I was someone who got it with her, she stopped, like, the wall came down a little bit, right? She and I became very good friends. Unfortunately, they moved recently, but she and I stay in touch. And she's had a miscarriage since here, like the loss upon loss upon loss, the loss of her country, the loss of her family. And Jane was saying, you know, she works with a lot of African women, like the trauma on trauma on trauma, just is so hard for folks. And I don't think that we provide enough support around that piece, that we're not just looking at an individual with a loss, we're looking at, you know, an individual with all these other pieces, right? I mean, prior to this, I did foster care. I had a 2-day-old baby that was with me till he was 18 months old. His goal was adoption until it wasn't. That was hard to go through. So it's like we all have these things in our lives that we've been through. And someone, you know, you go in for healthcare and someone asks like what your, you know, education level is. That has nothing to do with this moment and what support you're providing. And regardless of what color my skin is, what language I speak, what education level I have, I should be receiving the exact same support and care as the next person. And if I can say anything to the providers here who are doing it, is to acknowledge that you need to be showing up, addressing whatever, we all have biases, addressing whatever those biases are, to give everyone the same level of support and care that you would give to the richest white person that comes in, to the poorest Black person that comes in. They all deserve the same care. They all have the same needs. And until we start hearing folks and addressing these inequities, we're going to continue to have folks experiencing loss. And when we have a system, I mean, there aren't even support groups for people like me, never mind support groups for Afghan women who speak Pashto or Congolese women who don't speak English. So they're already at a disadvantage in terms of finding community and support. We at least need to make sure that the medical providers that are caring for them are doing it and as respectful and compassionate as they can. And that also means that you all as providers need to get the support you need to do your jobs, because dealing with loss day in and day out is exhausting. And so if you are a medical provider in a situation where you're dealing with loss a lot and you're getting to the point where you're starting to see it as like, this is what happens, like, here's another one, you need to get some support so that you can show up for those people, or tap out and take a break and tap someone else in who can be more compassionate, because those were the most traumatic experiences for me, were being in the room and having a provider come and just being completely inappropriate in what was being said. And without those, the trauma might have looked a little bit different. So we always have to be mindful that that may be the only interaction that you have with that family, and whatever that looks like is what they're going to remember. And so you have the opportunity to change that story. And I highly recommend that you Google how to stop a trauma and find the YouTube video. There's a guy who worked with Syrian refugees about how do you change a trauma in the moment. It is really powerful. So you all have the opportunity across everything, whether it's infant loss, pregnancy, whatever, across everything. We have the ability to change the story of trauma when we're working with folks. It's what we're bringing to the table. So I really just encourage folks to get the support you need so you can show up, because this is hard work and loss isn't going to go away. This is one of the things that we're never going to fix. So we have to show up for each other and support each other. And I'm always happy to come and do trainings and talk with people about these things. So if anyone does, you know, want this in another format, I'm also happy to connect with folks that way. So
What a beautiful spot to leave it at, Jillian. Thank you so much. As has been said, we so deeply appreciate your vulnerability, your willingness to tackle hard topics, and the work that you continue to do for people. I can't thank you enough. I'm so touched. Thank you all for being here today. It means the world that there's still so many people that care about other people. It's going to keep us going through the times ahead. It's all we got. So thank you all so much.
thanks, everyone.